personality complements mine well, even though I haven't spoken with him that much, because it's like, he's so
We're live now,
high
by the way.
energy. Yeah. Oh well. But yeah, he's really high energy in a way that I'm not.
Yeah. No, I kind of like the cast of characters we've ended up with this stream here. So this is actually one of the only ones where we don't have Glebs, aka Privileged Dear Shitlord. He had some things to do today. So it's me and Ashley. And maybe Prince of Queens later. Um
Does
and
nobody else in the Discord have a mic? That's really weird.
I don't think so. Well, let's see, because the other real active person in there is, I'm not sure what he would go
Honks.
by on the internet, Honks or Toto. And I know that for a while he didn't have a mic, but like around Christmas time when I had my Christmas stream, I was like, "Hey, bro, if you want to hop on, you can." And he was like, "I don't have a mic." I don't know if that's changed though. But yeah, I think most of the regular people who show up here would be interesting to hop on. So if anybody out there is listening, like, just send me a message on Discord. This is a thing that I've learned of like for years, just lurking on YouTube and just like following videos. It never occurred to me until like kind of recently that like you can send people a message on Facebook. And if they don't respond, it's like, okay, I mean that's kind of the same as you never having messaged them, so you might as well just see. It was like I had that guy who was like, I don't believe that you just messaged Dana Martin and then she just agreed to come on. Like there's some kind of conspiracy here. This is like an anarchist conspiracy. And I'm just like I don't.
Who who said that?
Oh, that was this guy. He follows Gay Trick. He goes by Seto, Seto. And he
Oh,
makes like really long, like in-depth comments on a lot of things, which is really interesting. It's really interesting to like get his take on stuff because he like takes notes, like leaves really robust comments. So you can see that throughout like all the like gay tricky videos, he'll show up here and there. He called me a monster at one point, and I'm like, I'm
well,
sorry.
you kind of are, but that's what's so great about you.
I kind of am. Kind of
Yeah.
a little bit absolutist. Anybody who's a little bit of an idealist is kind of a monster.
Yeah. A harmless psychopath.
I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a psychopath, but
Yeah.
I don't think so. I have been called that though. And then
I was joking. I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy to detect.
we're
Sorry.
never sure because that topic comes up semi frequently.
With whom? Just randos.
Just in
In
I don't know, just in the circles on the YouTubes.
yeah.
Let's see.
God.
See, nobody's here yet because it started like semi on time, which is very unusual. But this one is interesting because we have Laura S. Brown, who is a doctor, psychologist doctor, psychotherapy doctor, feminist therapy, cultural competence in trauma therapy is one of her best sellers. She's actually quite prolific. She has many different gems here. I'll go ahead and toss this on the screen up here so you can see.
Wow.
Yeah.
Feminist therapy. Considering that even normal therapy seems to be largely useless, like that's what the evidence suggests. Oh my god, that's like a whole other level of cringe.
Yeah, it's like Inception of being useless.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna put this in front. Do 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 do. I heard a noise. I don't know if was that you or is that Prince hopping on?
Um.
I think it
Oh no,
was.
Prince
Yeah, it
is
is
here.
Prince. Welcome.
Hi.
All right, so we can hear you. Good. So what I'm doing now is I am putting things on the screen so we can look at some background on our people today. So here we have Laura S. Brown on her website, and I can't see things on the screen that I'm using right now because it's like my broken laptop. but I can see it through like this tiny little Discord window here. Anyway, here's her website. She has a much more professional banner than our friend Starhawk, who I'm just gonna pull it up because I laugh every time I see it. It makes me really happy. Starhawk, is that
She
it?
wasn't she wasn't the one who wrote in Ebonics, right? That was the
No,
previous
that
one.
was Hattie Gossett. This is
Yeah.
Starhawk. I love her. She's my spirit animal. She's so good. Actually,
Okay.
I should join this newsletter because this is probably amazing. Another time, Starhawk. But anyway, today we have Laura S. Brown, and here's some of her works. She talks about like queer and lesbian psychotherapy. There's something about like a gay
Or
and lesbian paradigm in psychology or whatever. You can't access any of this crap though because it's it's all behind like a paywall. So that's my excuse for just kind of I
yeah,
guess not being as charitable as
is
perhaps
it
I should be.
is it like a journal article? Or
Yeah, some of these are in like proper journals. But she
right.
also has bestsellers, so that has to be like a proper book. She has like books and she has other stuff. So she's, she's out there writing stuff.
Yeah. It
Good for
might
her.
actually it might actually be on Sci-Hub because Sci-Hub also has philosophy and cringe stuff on it, so
That should be a thing. Maybe after I finish going through this book, we'll have kind of a list of these authors and like the most interesting ones we can kind of double back and take a look at. Like the goddess movement in particular is something that's so funny. It's such a shame that my mic was so garbage in the last stream because that was a really freaking funny like passage.
yeah.
uh, Going into the woods and then meeting the stag and like lighting a candle. The funny thing is later that day I got into an argument with a feminist on Facebook who like basically said she was a witch and that she was gonna like cast a spell on me by lighting a candle, and I'm just like, really, really. It's a
I
little
do I do feel as
coincidence.
though we spent most of that podcast just taking the piss, more or less. There wasn't a whole lot of serious content or
Yeah, I
any.
mean, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? I guess what I could do is we could really try. We could really try to reach out to these gods and,
What?
and see if there's anything there. So that's this one. So she is, psychotherapy, Dr. Brown, but it's a lot of queer lesbian stuff. I think she is a lesbian. She lists all of her group identities that are relevant and pertinent in bleh, in this thing we'll be reading, which is Essential Lies. And
Um,
yes,
can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say that my mic was muted for a second. This whole witch thing that happened in the 90s, and we all know how it ended. They came out with the show Charmed.
Oh, dude, and you know what? There's actually a goddess movement TV show from the late '80s and early '90s called 13th Heaven. And I was looking for it because I'm sure it's like the funniest frickin' thing ever, but it's nowhere to be found. I can't find it anywhere. And by nowhere to be found, I mean like it's not on YouTube or Netflix, so I gave up. It was too hard.
Hmm.
But someday, maybe I'm gonna check all the local libraries, see if there's just like a dusty old copy hanging out. Okay, so that's
So
this. And then sorry, what?
I, I just wanted to state real quick because you were talking about Facebook arguments. I have been having this fucking ongoing argument with this friend of mine who is, oh my god, I told her that I would unfriend her if she didn't cut out her fucking moronic behavior. And she hasn't really, but she said that she would, but I think that she just like doesn't understand how things work. Like she keeps actively saying, "No, we should have productive conversations." And then she has friends calling gay guys homophobes, saying that the Proud Boys are um uh white, literal Nazis, and then citing the SPLC. It was so bad that eventually like one of her friends physically threatened me because I said that woman in Portland who is the Antifa who tried to like start a riot a month or two ago. Um, Basically, like the Patriot Prayer and Proud Boys showed up, and she was like spitting on them, and then they demasked her, and then she like started trying to hit them, and like hit the cameras out of their hands, and then eventually like the bear mace came out and everything. I was like, he was like, yeah, but they hit a woman, and I'm like, she deserved it, and I hope she learns a lesson. That's what happens when you incite riots.
Oh, do you
And
mean do you mean Goldilocks or
no,
Moldilocks?
no, no, this happened just like a month or so ago. I could show you the video.
I can't even keep it
Um,
straight anymore. Like,
yeah, so that guy like threatened me, and uh it got really bad, and I told my friend, I was like, look, you're not, you keep saying that you want us to have a civil conversation, but you never reprimand your idiot friends. They're the ones who are the problem. They're the bad actors. I am actually linking things, like I linked countless videos, a number of articles, like trying to back up my views, that type of a thing. And they're just like, no, but they're literally Nazis, and you're a Nazi too. Like that's dumb. You know how it always goes. And she like only reprimands me and her other friends who are actually logical. And then she also was admitting that she wasn't even reading the full threads. Like apparently in her little twisted head, if she sees somebody repeatedly getting in an argument with her friends, that means they're the problem, you know? And so it's like we get victim blamed. And she brings it up again 4 months later or 4 weeks later. She resurrects the goddamn thread and starts responding to me finally, because I guess she's like decided to go back and really read it. And like she wasn't saying things this time that were entirely wrong, but then one of her moronic friends was like, clearly this prince is just so much of a sea lion that he can't let this thread die. And I was like, no, actually, she brought it back up, and she was like, yeah, I did. And then this other guy's like, no, I blame Prince. And like she refuses to reprimand him, and she's still doing it. And it's like, okay, he like, can you not see, like, your actions are being used as like as an excuse to attack me, and you refuse to even mention that this is a problem? Yeah, I just wanted to vent about it.
no, yeah,
Yeah,
and
what?
that's whenever you have a white chick talking about healing, there's it's a red flag. It's a red flag.
Yeah, I mean, she's reminding me of just like one of the awful elementary school teachers I had that, like hated certain kids, including me, but not just me. And no matter what we did, we could never do anything right. We would always get in trouble, and then liked some kids, and then those kids were she would always turn a blind eye to everything they did. And it's like, that you're really that stupid, but you're doing it to your fucking friends? Seriously? And after you said that you wouldn't, like, she legitimately, I don't know if she really, no, she legitimately believes, she said to me, well, Prince, you're I think that you should try to understand their perspectives a bit better. And it's like, I do. Everybody does. The left is the dominant cultural narrative, and they haven't tried to actually explain anything. Like, I know why they think the Proud Boys are Nazis. I know that because he linked it. It was a Southern Poverty Law Center thing. I'm the one it's like, I think it's just that she cannot bring herself to admit that there's a possibility that she just doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, she's one of these people that like is so dumb, basically, that they think that people who are anti-feminists just have never heard that feminism is really just equality. Like, and if you just tell them that, they'll be like, oh, okay, you know. So
No, yeah, and like the other thing too is it's funny how quickly all that stuff unravels. Like it just goes back to like one or two different sources, or even that Echoplex guy, Echoplex Media, who was on Honey Badger Radio a few days ago. You
Yeah,
know,
I was gonna say,
yeah, we followed him into his
like,
Discord, right? And the viewers were kind of talking to him, and there was some pretty interesting stuff. But I tried to get him to substantiate his claims, and like, he's like, "Oh well, in the past 12 months, there's been so much manosphere violence," and I'm like, "Can you like just name a couple?" And he's like, Elliot Rodger. And it's like, it's
yeah,
like,
12 months.
and then he's like,
he
also
was
First,
look at
first
this
of all,
Paul Elam article,
first
and
of
I'm like, that Paul Elam article is based in Red Pill. Like, why did you even read the title of it? He reads Bash of Violent Bitch Month. It's like it's in the
yeah, and
title that she's a perpetrator.
yeah, and then that becomes um, bash your battered wife some more because we hate them
Yeah, that's
in
the
his
it's
weirdest
head.
one for sure.
yeah, it just seemed like the quintessence really of a pointless argument.
Well, but the other thing too is it's not even new. Like at least somebody who tries to cite like the SPLC's crap, like their newer crap, or the ADL's new crap, or like that stupid what was that stupid report they did on like online radicalization on YouTube, right? Like at least that
Yeah,
would be like semi recent crap that came out within the last like year. This is like 2014. This is like they stepped out of a time capsule.
yeah,
But yeah, it's like I
it's like
still,
even ContraPoints does a better job. Sorry, Ashley.
it's fine. People still talking about the wage gap, for instance. It's like, you feel like you're in a goddamn time warp when you see these people. I saw this video by Ariel Scarcella. I imagine most of you are, sorry, you're both at least vaguely aware of her. Um, yeah, she's an interesting character. She was doing this video with, I think, a bisexual male porn actor, and he was saying, it was right at the start of the video, he said something like, "Oh, isn't it fucked up how this industry, meaning porn, is the only industry where the pay gap favors women?"
Ugh.
Um, Derek, did you have a chance to bring up with the guy the fact that you're a gay MRA?
I didn't bring it up personally, because he was kind of getting dogpiled. So mostly I've just kind of been lurking.
Yeah, because I mean, I can't stand that guy. He's completely insufferable, and just like I wouldn't even
Well,
say he's stupid. He's just deranged. Like he is just totally, like he's eats so many blue pills. Like his blood is entirely blue. Like he's like a big blueberry, and um that whole thing, because I went back and watched the stream. The first thing he said about gay MRAs, he was like, well, um during the 90s and everything, like there was a lot of male issues, but I didn't hear of any gay MRAs talking about them, which is weird because it seems like they probably would have, but I assume there's I could only guess that there is no gay MRAs. That was like the first thing he said about it. And
Yeah, and then later on he says that all gay MRAs must be like self-loathing or whatever, and it's just
yeah,
very
and
silly.
so I do think it would kind of be worth having a debate with him about that. I don't see, but I would need to have it if I were to have a debate with him, it would need to be moderated, and it would need to be the type of thing where like we're both muted when the other person is talking, because that guy was just a serial interrupter. And the type of he reminded me of Michael Eric Dyson when he debated Jordan Peterson, and the black guy that kind of looks like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was when he debated Jordan Peterson, he was just all like, "Oh, there, I have never seen so much wine from and cheese like you." All you white males, Dr. Peterson with his million sales in books, Dr. Peterson with the highest amount of people on Patreon, like you have so much to cry about. You are such a snowflake. Remember that guy?
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw that one actually, but
Oh,
I
it was
kind of
worth
get the
watching.
idea of the yeah.
It was worth watching just to see. like the most unself-aware person ever just make a complete ass out of himself. And he was just constantly crying and like couldn't let Dr. Peterson speak. Like Jordan Peterson it would start, he'd be like, well, what I want to say about this, and he was like, please say it. And he's like, is that blah 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 blah. He's like, I'm waiting. Oh, I am waiting. And like just that level of conversational bullying, where the clear reality was, if and all of the stuff that he said was just completely trite whining about how hard black people have it, just like yeah, but the historical and the blah 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 blah. And then Peterson trying to stay on subject, and because the debate was about has political correctness gone too far, and like he was just making it about his own victimhood and then trying to accuse Peterson of playing victim when they were talking about an objective reality that wasn't necessarily about either victimization, and then sort of accusing Peterson of wanting to be a white male victim or whatever, and
And that's kind of like the epitome of the left can't meme, is them trying to call right wingers like snowflakes.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
they're always either completely hysterical like that guy, or passive aggressively smug, as the Echoplex chap was. That
yeah,
was
Or like how
yeah.
Destiny always is.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's fun for some things, I guess. I mean, amusing, but
yeah.
um, yeah, the whole tone of that conversation was so strange. I think he called Brian a Nazi at one point, and he said Nazi, which is, if I'm remembering correctly, which is at least moderately less annoying than the other way of pronouncing it, which is Nazi.
Nazi.
Like, Nazi.
Nazi.
Yeah. Oh my god, the Nazis are coming.
The Nazis and their friendship windmills. And their friendship windmills everywhere.
Yeah, it sounds like a bug that would bite people that would carry diseases.
Yeah, like tsetse flies or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So on the screen here, what I have is our other artist, or not artist, our other author that we're going to be reading through today if we get to hers. This is her website where she has her Mother Peace Tarot. She gives tarot readings. So I think that's one of these times I should schedule like a phone call with her and see if I can like stream a tarot reading from this feminist using her Mother Peace Tarot deck.
Yeah, that would be funny.
So that, and her article is called "A Helping Hand from the Guys." So kind of, again, like I've read this book like a year and a half or so ago, and I haven't reread it, so I'm going in a little bit blind, but that kind of makes it more fun. But the first one, "Essential Lies" by Dr. Brown, it's gonna be delving into probably like ecofeminism, essentialism, that kind of stuff. It's a very pointed sort of critique of the mythopoetic men's movement. So kind of encapsulating like the overall tone of this entire book, really, or at least all the things that are kind of unique to it. And then the second one, "The Helping Hand from the Guys," is going to be, a lot of female hypo agency, a lot of woman worsting. So
Derek, do you have the bingo cards?
I do. Okay, so the bingo card, yes, is I have it just on my screen. I'm not gonna bother with the little hashtag things because it's too much to keep up with. But I think I can just close this window, right? None of this is important right now. Okay, I didn't break everything. Good. Okay, so that's my bingo card. And if you want to play bingo, this is the link, and I will put the link in the chat right now. So everybody can choose your own card because there's like a bunch of them. It can be a proper game.
Mm-hmm.
But our bingo card has, the standard feminist things. They're basically all free spaces. We practically have a bingo before even starting. So, I'm going to make this smaller so I can get my pages up. Okay, so this is the first page. And I'm going to bring this to the front. I just narrate it because I think that comfortable silence is a myth. That's stupid. That Pulp Fiction spread, and then everybody thinks that they actually think that, and it's not true. Okay. I'm going to start reading this. So it's Essential Lies, a dystopian vision of the mythopoetic men's movement by Laura S. Brown. It says something about the ability of patriarchy to confuse women's thinking that I, who can usually sit down at the computer and simply state what is on my mind about almost any topic, have been for the last hour forthing and backing and deleting lines and acting as a well-trained woman in that I cannot seem to find my voice. I have become aware in this process of what is stopping me, of my fears of what will happen to me if I say here what I believe to be true. Some attorney for a batterer or rapist or sexually abusive therapist will use it to try to discredit me in court, to prove that I am a radical, man-hating dyke whose expert opinions on male violence against women and its mental health consequences should be ignored because of my terrible bias. Because, you know, in patriarchy, any opinions critical of its institutions are prima facie non-objective and biased. This is the lesson I have learned as an expert witness in the so-called justice system. When I realized that my problem with writing was that I was busily trying to find a way to say what I thought without really being clear about it, I shut off the computer and did something to get myself back on track. And this is the beginning of page 2. So, number 2. And anybody in chat, I don't know how readable it is at this. I think that putting it in Discord and then downloading it again really messes up the quality. You should probably get my USB to get the images directly off the phone, but anyway. Hello, Port Film Co-op. Nice to see you here. Okay. I shut off the computer and did something to get myself back on track. I went back and reread some of the essays in a book called Refusing to be a Man by John Stoltenberg, a pro-feminist white male anti-pornography activist, and reminded myself that if he was willing to be a traitor to his class, then why should I not be loyal to my own and also tell the truth? So just for a little background, John Stoltenberg is a gay male feminist, and you can actually find Refusing to be a Man for free online, and it's pretty infuriating. It actually kind of encapsulates a lot of the criticisms that Echoplex guy would have towards gay MRAs. So I dare suggest there's a lot of projection there. But are either of you guys have you guys looked into John Stoltenberg at all? Well, you guys can both hear me, right? Hello? It says I'm still live.
I'm here. I'm just listening while I smoke.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, still here. Right. So we'll just plow through this page then. But anyway, that's John Stoltenberg. That needs a whole stream, reading through that. He's come up a few times. Okay. So she figures, since John Stoltenberg was willing to betray gay men, shouldn't I do something that is loyal to my own as a lesbian? It's kind of very appropriate. She'd never dare say, maybe I should betray the lesbians then. No. It's very unidirectional. And I was also brought back into my mind and my knowing about how powerful is that most original of men's movements, the movement that is patriarchy, whose intellectual and emotional outposts continue to live on inside my mind. Reminded of why it was, when Kay's letter first came inviting me to participate, that I said yes without thinking, even though I have a pile of other writing projects to do. Reminded that I have a lot of things I have been thinking about this men's movement for quite a while now. How do I feel? I, a lesbian, feminist, Ashkenazic Jewish woman, a clinical psychologist who works with and testifies for the survivors of violence and exploitation. How do I feel about the mythopoetic men's movement? I feel frightened, and angry, and critical, and amused. I think that anything which is so terrifically attractive to white, middle class, heterosexual men, for who else is buying Iron John in hardback? Who else able in these recession? I don't know why her style of writing is like really tripping me up. She has these like stupid like prepositions where they're like not needed. Who else able in these recession times to fork out the dollars for a men's wisdom retreat? Is probably very dangerous to women. I say this knowing that women friends of mine have bought this book for their husbands, and that women colleagues of mine have proposed that our organization of psychologists sponsor Robert Bly to speak under our auspices. But then, again, many women have been drawn to the codependency movement, which I see as one of the most powerfully subtle attempts to pathologize and undermine women's normative ways of being that I've encountered in a long time. I do not think that what is dangerous to women can be calibrated by some women's liking of it. All right, any thoughts so far?
No, not really.
Yeah,
Sounds pretty typical.
I just think it's so revealing that she says anything which is so terrifically attractive to white, middle class, heterosexual men is probably very dangerous to women. Like, she just accepts that as a general rule.
I think I said this on a previous stream. The great majority of feminists have those demographic characteristics minus the male part. So
Yeah, well, and she does if you count Jews as white. And like certainly as like a psychologist, psychotherapist, like she's definitely not like lower class. She's in academia. She is a doctor, so okay. I'm gonna grab the third page before I continue. Page 3. But yeah, and then another theme too is it's always saying, oh, these men, because they can afford these retreats, they're obviously these rich, privileged men who are problems. That's a very common avenue for them to attack the mythopoetic movement from. And she continues, and I am not surprised at all that this phenomenon has arisen now, in the midst of the Reagan-Bush era, side by side with the rest of the backlash against women and other non-dominant groups that Gloria Steinem first identified for us in her brilliant essay, Night Thoughts of a Media Watcher, and which Susan Faludi has more recently enlarged upon in her book, Backlash. Which, by the way, Christina Hoff Sommers, like, absolutely destroys that book in Who Stole Feminism. So it's funny that this is just 2 years before Who Stole Feminism comes out, and she's citing it as this great thing that Susan Faludi wrote. The zeitgeist has become increasingly overt in its women blame in the past decade, and this movement reflects its times. It is not the men's movement of the late 1970s, in which I saw some white men take the first few tentative steps toward responsibility for their power. It is a movement for the 1990s, retro like much else that is in fashion. So let me take each of my reactions and examine them, which is my tendency, being a psychologist and a therapist. Fear first. Why should I be frightened of a group of men getting together to bang on drums and talk about their feelings and awaken the wild man within? What's the threat? If you watch Murphy Brown long enough, you might even think it's only pathetic and funny. But it's not a joke. The reasons for my fear are complex and rooted in my own heritage. The mythopoetic men's movement defines manhood in a variety of ways that also imply definitions of and attitudes toward women. These definitions are, to begin with, essentialist. That is, they propose that there is a basic, probably biological essence of maleness that is present across time and culture in every human creature with a Y chromosome. It is this maleness that the rituals of the men's movement seeks to honor and evoke, to rescue from the feminizing trappings of civilization. The contemporary notion is that women can also be defined in such an essentialist manner, and that there are characteristics and ways of being that are essentially and forever female. Claims that have, unfortunately, been made by some feminist thinkers, and that have been extraordinarily popular. Leaving aside for a moment my social constructivist intellectual critique of essentialism, with its tendencies toward racism and ahistoricism, I know that at the core I am always frightened by essentialist notions, be they of gender, race, religion, fill in the blank, because of their terrible propensity for feeding fascism. If something is innately so about men or women, then we can be certain that, not long after it has been so defined, someone will be attempting to legislate a certain way of being for us, just in case we've missed our natural, innate calling. Living in cultures where there are tremendous imbalances of power in favor of men, such legislation is rarely going to be for women's benefit, and often will endanger our souls, our bodies, or both. Hey, Pillars in the chat. Nice to see you. Do, 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 do. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of this one.
I got something to say.
Okay. I got something to say.
Hold on. So, this whole all or nothing, what's the word? Mutually exclusive way of viewing essentialism as a bad thing, and then blank slate as this inalienable truth. It's so juvenile, and it's just so amazing that people try to, I bet maybe this woman self-identifies as a postmodernist, but she probably doesn't. One of the current new strategies in trying to undermine the work of specifically Jordan Peterson is where it kind of stemmed, the postmodern neo-Marxist narrative, which the ContraPoints zombies are all obsessed with trying to debunk, because that is apparently the orders that they were given by their leaders. It's just so stupid when you look at women who actually say things like that. Like they would easily say, she doesn't define as a postmodernist. No. And it's like, do you just not understand what postmodernism is? Like one of the essential facets in postmodernism, and how dare I say essential facets, according to them, is this denial of essentialism. This denial that there are certain things that are not imposed upon us by the dominant culture, but are just imposed on us, say, biologically. And so it's just so infuriating to see how blatant these people are. Like, no, of course women are trained to just act in the way that we don't want them to. And blah, 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 blah. And of course men are trained. And it's like, okay, yeah, now you're just saying that. It's just conjecture. And there's people who would say, well, she's not a postmodernist. Yes, she is, just like essentially every feminist past the 70s.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that a lot of times, like when I was reading through a lot of the stuff with like ecofeminism and like kind of reviewing this essentialism and everything, it really is pervasive down to the core of how they think. A lot of them won't necessarily put it out into this language, which is what's so refreshing about this book. But it's a very dishonest approach to just understanding anything, because you literally can't define a word without being essentialist. And what it is it's just a way of saying that it's kind of just a way of making any distinction off limits, but there's no way for them to even say these things without kind of invoking an essence of something. Like if she's a social constructivist, well, sorry, that there's kind of an essence to that, isn't there? She kind of has some natural assumptions about the way that reality is and its ability to affect people.
And she's also been horrifically hypocritical already in that, she thinks that because this is attractive to white men, then it's innately bad, and things like that. It's like, uh,
Well, in her defense, she didn't say it's necessarily bad, just she's very suspicious. That's
yeah, well,
all, right?
and also, but okay, the other hypocrisy is sort of a bigger one. It's that the notion that the powerful individuals are always going to be wrong, and that they are trying to impose, and assuming that white men who like this book are kind of powerful, which is she doesn't have any evidence for, um, then they are likely attracted to it because of some deep hatred of women, and that's just such a sweeping generalization about people that she has no idea what they are. But it's I mean, the whole postmodern worldview is an essentialist thing, like they believe that power is, bad, and that it must always be subverted. It's very Trotskyian, actually. Like, he believes in this, that the world is best in a state of constant revolution. So it's not just about achieving the communist utopia, but because he started to see that Stalin, like, Stalin had him killed eventually. And so he was like, no, there should be a revolution, but there should always be revolutions. That's my defense, or whatever. And that's like the basis of uh, what people refer to as Trotskyism, and it's also basically the basis of postmodernism. And that is so essentialist by itself. Like, that's such a hugely constricting and unwavering viewpoint that it's absurd to, yeah. I think you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and I think the most, I mean, it's kind of cynical, but it's words as magic spells. Like, I think we're gonna give ourselves a headache trying to step into this as a way of like legitimately, honestly trying to understand the world. Like, she has emotions and fears and goals and things that she wants, and I think that she just talks until it happens. She kind of gave us a hint of that in the very first page. When she says, I normally don't have any trouble writing about anything I want to write about. It just comes right out. And it's like, yeah, that's why you do like lesbian psycho feminist therapy. Like, okay. Well, actually, I need to take a quick bathroom break. So I'm going to be right back here. Actually, maybe, how about this? I'll read a little bit more and then I'm going to take a bathroom break. Um, Okay, so do I have the right page up here? Yes, I do. She says, for the potential outcomes of such notions, I find myself reviewing some of the dystopian speculative fiction that I have read, all of it, interestingly, written by women. Look at the Gilead of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, an essentialist theocracy in which the experiences of men seem to be natural outgrowths of the mythopoetic men's movement, where men raise men, consort with men, and relegate women to their places as caretaker and birth giver. Or, for a bleaker vision of where the essentialist perspective of this men's movement can lead us, try the books of Susie McKee Charnas. Her reality in Walk to the End of the World and Mother Lines is one in which male children are wrested from their mothers at birth, raised in a post-nuclear wasteland to be heroes and warriors who do not even know what women are, that women are of the same species, imprisoning women as slaves and animals who are underfed, raped, and then beaten for stealing men's maleness during heterosex. These men model themselves on the heroes of the Trojan War, looking to myth for their self-definition. Don't tell me it can't happen here, that no such terrible outcome can arise from something as apparently silly as men in a room with a drum. As a Jew, I know better. Hitler and his gang began as just a fringe group joke to the assimilated Jews of Germany. Hitler, too, looked to myth and legend, and to what was essentially German to feed his murderous visions of reality. He, too, relied upon ritual, upon the special bonds between men, to build his movement. Millions of Jews and gypsies and queers died in this attempt to make those myths real. My great grandfather and my partner's grandparents among them. So that
Huh.
wraps up her
And
fear
it
response.
yet more inherent contradictions. Like the notion that she's trying to get at is that um due to Hitler's fondness of myths and his believing in these things, uh that he believes are true that have to do with myths and German culture, he ended up being a fascist. And according to her, um, she believes that because some weird futuristic feminist dystopian novel, she read it, then she also knows it could be true or something. And I just want to say, has anybody else noticed how much feminists rely on fictions to form their worldview? Like, so many people internalize, like, my leftist friends, like a number of people that are actually fairly good friends, they internalize so much out of like HBO shows. Like they, really looked to Game of Thrones and even Orange is the New Black as if this was real, and they would talk about the characters like they were real people and as if these things really happened. And like when the one inmate dies from police brutality in Orange is the New Black, they spoke of her like she was their friend or something. And it's like, that's a kind of a problem for people who like pretend to know stuff about politics. Like that's like feminists have no problem basing their stuff on things that is not actually demonstrable in the real world.
Well, the interesting thing about that in visual media is that it's fairly common knowledge to people, like completely uncontroversial, that documentaries can have political bias, especially if it's a result of the oversight of just one person. People understand that people go into directing and producing documentaries with all sorts of ideological biases. So it's intuitive to people that you have to be careful interpreting documentaries, even normies. But with drama, um, and fiction in general, it's kind of different because it's not presenting you with actual ideas in the sense of actual concrete propositions. It's presenting you with characters. Yeah, Game of Thrones is a good recent example. And yeah, people do talk about it as if it's a complete reflection of reality. So yeah, it's like a subtler form of ideological manipulation that you can practice through fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. They can look at the characters and think, well, I've known people like this and blah, blah, blah. Like it kind of, they seem so real because they remind me of certain things that have happened to me, blah, 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 blah. And then things happen and it's like, but you have no real reason to believe that that would actually happen at all.
Well, and in the first part of this collection here, we had Ursula K. Le Guin's where she says, "I felt that the only way to express the truth was in fiction."
Just like ContraPoint said.
That's right. I don't know if that's where she got it. I wonder if she found this book. I wonder if she is the one who checked this book out in 2002. That's the other person who had this book. They had it in 2002. And then it's been sitting on a shelf until I took it. But have you guys like are you guys familiar with Handmaid's Tale? Like I'm sure you're familiar with like the concept of it, but have you like actually watched any of it?
I was actually forced to read it at the end of, for a literature class, at the end of what you would call high school. Um, I can't remember really any of it though because it was morosely boring and shit. So
Yeah, I
sorry, no.
watched like the first two episodes of it and I thought this is super boring and dumb. And like within those episodes there's a guy who gets like basically lynched for being accused of rape, right? And I'm sitting here kind of like, are the men even better off in this society? You know, like I think that if you really approached it from that angle, even in this like feminist dystopia, the women don't even seem like they're worse off in general than the men. Seems like it's still the men doing all of the very hard work. You know, it seems like if the men fail to fulfill their role, right, they're going to be subjected to punishments as well. And the whole thing is told from the perspective of women who like were criminals first, right? So these are like female prisoners basically that become these handmaidens. So it's just it's very silly how like even within their dystopia, they don't think to actually question the other half of a comparison that's being implied.
Well, at the risk of being a little bit of an essentialist, humans wouldn't have evolved if women had a proper or more complete understanding of male suffering. Like women have to actively train themselves to think of males as the same bracket as females when it deserves when in terms of deserving compassion.
Yeah, and it is a really good question whether or not like there's really a realistic way to undo gynocentrism. There's many people, you know, within the manosphere who would say gynocentrism is not a bad thing. It's just something that we have to recognize. I guess I'm a little bit more, dare I say, progressive in the sense that I'm like, no, we don't need it. We can get rid of it. Like let's actually see if egalitarianism can work. And maybe that does make me a monster.
Well,
I think that
there is
Turdfling and Monkey would call me a monster for saying something like that.
there is kind of a lack of, I guess, what you might call theory of mind, in the sense that there seems to be a certain unwillingness on the part of many women to even recognize uh, male psychology or the male experience. It's kind of a cliched phrase, but just the ways in which male psychology is different, and to take it seriously, and the individual problems attendant to it seriously. And it's why there's this sort of cliche of um, guys, when they're first introduced to men's issues, they don't they think that they don't really have any reason to care, because they think, oh, well, this isn't going to affect me. They have that sort of pretense of invincibility. Oh, well, I'll be the exception to that statistic. And women don't seem to have any real reason to care about it at all. So it's, I know of people who want transhumanism. They have this real kind of futurist ethic where they want to engineer the gynocentrism out of men through rewiring their brains or whatever it might be, but it isn't even immediately obvious to me if men themselves would consent to that. So that's why, I mean, if we're going to talk about flights of fantasy, or, well, not fantasy, but uh, science fiction or science futurist scenarios at that level, then I think this solution is as good as any other, and it's why I kind of talked to Spaceman about this. I actually advocated telepathy as a possible solution. Like, maybe that would give people better theory of mind if they could just see into other people's brains.
Yeah,
And
or
yeah,
or record somebody's entire experience for a while and force them to live through it.
right.
Um,
Well, you
yeah.
took that and then you just made it like Clockwork Orange.
Well, no. You would just. It would be like in that movie Strange Days from the late '90s. It wasn't super popular, but it was kind of cool. It didn't age well. It was this futuristic thing about they called it cyber tripping, and you would a person could record all of their experiences, their touch, their taste, their sight, blah blah blah, and then you could put it on a little disk drive, and somebody else could live through it, and you do that willingly, and um, the movie didn't age well because it was that far in the future, but they still had payphones, you know. So like no cell phones. So that was weird, but it was a cool idea. I think that gynocentrism is probably going to, and this will take a while, be weeded out of the gene pool. Just because, entitled women who, like the women worsters, um, they are really insufferable. People are starting to wake up to that now. Like fourth wave feminism is, it's like third time's a charm. You got everything you asked for. And then when fourth wave feminism came around, it was like, okay, you people are all crazy female supremacists. That's all there is to it. And then they, chop their tits off and get hysterectomies so they can never have children and weird things like that because they want to be more non-binary, and they're unattractive, they're unpleasant, and then men and women who are willing to be honest about their experiences and that type of a thing, and raise their sons fairly, and those will be much more successful families. But we're really just beginning that process, so probably take a few hundred years. But I think in general, it will be weeded out of the gene pool to a
Yeah,
certain degree.
yeah, this is one of my most salient and important points that a lot of people seem weirded out by, because I guess it's kind of like, oh, eugenics, oh my god. But I don't understand why people complain so much when radical feminists tell women to not have children, because the thing is, the people who are going to be receptive to that kind of message, it selects for a certain type of person, i.e., women who have feminist inclinations. And quite honestly, it's a good thing if those people don't have children, because one, they shouldn't be anywhere near children, especially not males, and two, we don't need any more of them. So it's a great thing. We are being favored by evolution, which is great.
Absolutely. Yeah, the only feminists that'll stick around for a while are the ones that happen to, for whatever reason, be randomly really hot.
Yeah, or I guess the unorthodox ones like Palia. Well, except she's a lesbian, but you know what I mean.
And she's not a feminist. She just chose a definition of feminism during the second wave, and she chose the one that didn't take off.
But she's
Yeah,
sticking with it. She's sticking with it.
yeah, I think it's just a politically expediency thing with a
Yeah.
lot of these people.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't
she's
know.
she's the only one that I'm like. I've come to realize that I don't really like Christina Hoff Sommers all that much.
Yeah, same here.
She is a
Yeah.
She's a feminist apologist.
I still like Palia, but not her.
Yeah, I do like Polya, and Polya's the real deal. Like, I kind of feel because Christina Hoff Sommers was following Polya before Christina Hoff Sommers became a thing. I feel like she has ripped her off and has been peddling things like that are in the spirit of what Polya has always been talking about, and she's made it more marketable for the masses. But she's not the genius there.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, this section here, um, I mean, one thing I'm gonna note that this is old enough that it's before Godwin's law was a thing, but it's just kind of funny how she's responding to her emotions one by one. The first one is fear, and I don't know. Did you guys get the sense that this was just like hysterically stupid?
Well,
Yeah.
the whole thing about associating, I guess, an interest in mythology with Hitler, it's really weird because I think most healthy cultures have like foundational myths, so they have a certain interest in myths and legends in that sense. It's not something that's peculiar to Nazi Germany or anything else really, any other culture or subculture.
Well,
Yeah,
and
like how the LGBT culture is really into the myth that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera threw the first shot glass at Stonewall.
right,
Yep.
but what I'm wondering is, does she imagine that the Nazis were stopped by a bunch of like black lesbians?
Probably. I mean, I wouldn't
It
put it
just
past.
it would kind of fit the Marsha. Maybe is that the Marsha P. Johnson effect? Like she's
Yeah,
just
that would be a
imagining.
that would be a good parody article, like satire article, like black women of color, queer black women of color, the queer black women of color who you didn't know ended Nazi Germany or something.
And we're joking, but when you think about how they're kind of like adding all this, like shoehorning all the diversity into like Call of Duty and shit, it kind of seems like they're creeping into that. It kind of seems like they're creeping into really as much as possible, as much as they can get away with, kind of amp up that narrative. So as much as that's a joke, I think there maybe is something to it.
Yeah, yeah. I blame Obama.
Yeah. All right, so we're on to the second emotion. Next, anger. Or perhaps outrage might be a better word for what I feel on this dimension. While individual men may not be any more the knowing beneficiaries of the best of patriarchal privilege than I am, the reality is that they do benefit more than they are willing to admit. Men in general, especially the white men who populate most of this men's movement, do not fear walking on their own street at night or being alone in their own homes, because they are not, for the most part, at risk of violence every day in their lives simply for being male. Which,
Ah!
bullshit.
Ah!
Bullshit. Bullshit. You know what's funny is the first half of that sentence is true, right? But everything after because is where she just really dropped the ball.
Well, and it's so dumb. It's like, yeah, yeah. Her defense, if you ever try to, remind her about reality and statistics of violence, she would say, yeah, but it's not because they are male. That's the point I was getting at. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, that doesn't matter. That's dumb. Like, that should have absolutely zero relevance in regards to whether someone is afraid. Um, but second of all, the reason why men are attacked more by criminals, not by other men, but by criminals who are a very small portion of the population. They just happen to attack a lot of people. Um, the reason men are afraid is because they are being targeted for being male. Because they won't beat up women. Period.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is that they take a statistical discrepancy, right, and say, oh, this kind of violence or this kind of crime affects women more often, therefore it's because they're women, and that standard is good enough when it comes to women. But then when you have the similar phenomenon happening when it comes to men, oh, well, that's just there's some other way to just explain it away. It can be 95% of all workplace deaths are male, but that's not because they're male. I actually had a feminist argue that's because men are dumb, basically.
Yeah, that happened to me.
Yeah.
I was like, I said 3% of workplace fatalities are against male, and you're telling me males are privileged. Why do you think that is? And then she did the little. She said, I don't know. Women are smarter at doing their job, or like women are better at doing their jobs. And then she put a little laugh react. I was like, "Ah, look at this little bimbo twirling her hair like she thinks she's cute." And her response was, "Bitch, I know I'm cute." Or something. It was so funny.
Wow.
It was like, see, this is how you. Okay, we can assume that you're not better at doing whatever job you have.
The funny thing though is it's almost like we can be like, okay, will you recognize men's issue if we admit that you're cute? Like, is that going to be a fair trade?
Yeah. Um,
Like, I really
and
feel like to a lot of these people, that's what matters more. I don't know. It's so stupid.
It's like, wait, what was that about only valuing women based on their looks again? Oh shit.
Yeah, right.
that's what's most important to women.
Yeah.
She continues, in every race and class, the men will make more money than the women, and are far less likely to be sexually harassed on the job, or disbelieved by their physician, and thus dangerously misdiagnosed when they complain of a chronic pain.
That's because women are more likely to be hypochondriacs. That's also because men are forced to do the grunt work that keeps the roof over the head by lazy women that are entitled. Uh, that uh, there's good essentialist reasons for these things.
Well, and is she suggesting that a misdiagnosis is worse than not being diagnosed? Because I'm sure a lot of this just comes from men, not seeking out medical help. And there's a variety of reasoning for that. One being that if you try to go for like any kind of psychotherapy, you could end up with this bitch. And
Yeah,
then we turn around and we blame men for not wanting this kind of help. It's like, well, if this is the kind of person in the profession, I know I'm doing exactly what she said. Oh, I'm afraid that if I say what I think, people are going to attack me in my professional career. But it's like, yeah, yeah. I'm not out to say like she should lose her job or whatever, but I'm saying, if this is what she thinks, she should, and I'm sure she's all for her clients understanding this is her perspective. You know, like, I feel like you should
with
understand the perspective of your person.
with respect to sexual harassment, which she mentioned, uh, actual statistics on this are kind of hard to come by, like differentiated by sex. But I remember seeing statistics in an Australian survey about a year ago on sexual harassment in the workplace in the previous 12 months, and the percentage of women and as compared with the percentage of men who reported some experience with it, that is, with workplace sexual harassment, in the previous 12 months prior to taking the survey was basically gender parity. From what I remember, I think it was like perhaps 5% for women and 4% for men. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't
Um,
know, maybe that data wasn't available in the 90s, but
But that's funny because
so
normally I would just concede that point. I'd say, okay, yeah, sure, women can be harassed in the workplace more often. Like, let's talk about all the different forms of sexual violence that we don't even count when it comes to men, right? But
mm,
it's funny that even if you were going to give them the charity and say that, it turns out maybe even the harassment's not true.
mhm.
and
um,
I guess the probably a common sort of reaction you might get is they're all being harassed by males, like I guess homosexual males. But since they're a fairly small percentage of the population, I don't see any reason to think that's true for the majority of those reports.
Yeah, those are some
yeah.
busy homos if that's the case.
Yeah.
Um, regarding sexual harassment and the gender dynamics in work, Chris Rock had a really funny joke about the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas situation in the 1990s. Ashley, do you know what that was?
Nope, enlighten me.
Is
Okay,
Anita
so
Hill pretended that he put a pube on her coke?
well, there was a number of things that she said. And I actually don't even get the impression that she was lying just based on my BS detector. Um, it did actually seem like she was likely telling the truth. Um,
I think she's a
but
liar.
well,
I don't
yeah,
believe her.
okay, just at face value, she probably was, but actually listening to her speak, she didn't seem like she was lying. Like it wasn't like Christine Blasey Ford, where it was like,
Oh yeah, it wasn't that
I
bad.
can
That's
tell,
true.
I can tell within the first 10 seconds that she's lying, you know. But so, um, and yeah, she was. He was a black guy that was being put on the Supreme Court in 1992, and the Democrats tried to block, or 1991, right before Bill Clinton was going to be in office, and the Democrats tried to block his confirmation by bringing up some mudslinging from some former employee that said that he had sexually harassed her, and Chris Rock, he said, he was like, man, sexual harassment, what is sexual harassment? Is that when an ugly guy tries to get some? I mean, because we all know that if Clarence Thomas had looked like Denzel Washington, this whole thing never would have happened. She'd just be like, oh, Clarence, you so nasty with your fine self.
Yeah, I'd say that's mostly accurate. It's a cliche at this point.
Oh yeah, that's just gotta know your place. Gotta know your place.
Yeah. Same with catcalling, etc., etc.
Mm. Yep, 80-20 rule. And you know what? When we mention the 80-20 rule and educate men on that, we're doing a service. We're letting everybody know. We're letting everyone know. If you're, we're helping prevent sexual harassment by
What's
spreading
the
mental health.
80-20 rule again? I forget.
It's that women only like the top 20% of guys,
Oh yeah, of course.
or that they'll judge 80% of men as below average.
Mm-hmm. Cause I just saw a weird, and I forget the exact argument, but like it was that kind of thing in reverse. Like, oh wait, was it Echoplex? Was he saying that like it's just guys who think that they should be able to get with women that are out of their league or whatever? Was
I
he
thought he
saying
was
that?
thought he was just saying, with respect to the manosphere, it's just a bunch of guys who can't get laid, which is, yet another cliche. I
Yeah, he
can't remember.
definitely said that, but I forget who was saying this, but yeah, like somebody was basically saying like guys who are about a 4 or 5 think that they can get with eights, and now they're mad because blah blah blah. So they blame feminism or some dumb crap like that.
That actually reminds me. Sorry, this is a little off topic, but um, I remember someone saying that the reason that I think it was Ed Dutton. I'm not going to go into who he is for the purposes of this conversation, but he was basically saying that in Islamic countries, the reason that women have to cover up, wear the niqab, etc., is because they're going to be raped, because the bottom 80% of men in the socio-sexual hierarchy don't get anything, they don't get any access to women because of polygamy, which is kind of a trope, I guess, a prevailing trope in discussions of these topics around the effects of monogamy and polygyny and so on. But at least in Saudi Arabia, it's actually not as common these days as people think it is. It's about 3% of men in Saudi Arabia today, if I remember correctly, are in polygynous marriages.
Huh.
So, sorry, that was a huge detour, but yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
No, it's a good, and that's a thing too. Just the whole like, I call it a coffee shop anti-feminist approach where people say, well, how come feminists don't focus on the Middle East? And it's just stupid. Okay.
Yeah, but the better argument is how come feminists only ever focus on the Middle East if you actually ask for examples of women being oppressed?
Yeah, but they're not.
But
The point
okay,
is they're
but
not.
regardless, it's so funny how they never actually try to change that in any substantial way, but it serves to be. It's like they don't want it to change, so they get to always complain about manspreading and mansplaining, and then be like,
Yeah,
well,
they
no,
gave
but
us that, and they gave us the pay gap, and they carted out Christy Blasey Ford. So if that's not oppression, I don't know what is. I don't know what is.
But it's like
yeah,
in the
yeah, it's
Middle
like we deserve to all listen and believe Christine Blasey Ford because there's some messed up stuff happening in the Middle East. Logic sound.
and people argue about whether the norms are desired to satisfy men's preferences or female preferences. There's this whole argument between male control versus female competition and so on, and usually those two effects are both present. They interact to a certain extent. It's it's interesting, but ultimately the salient thing is who enforces the norms, the social norms, highly religiously conservative norms. And if they're enforced by women just as much as men, then I don't think you have any business really uh, calling it a society that in which women in particular are put upon. And lots of people have talked about all of the ways in which those societies place different expectations on men as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be smoking a cigarette, just so you know.
All
Cool.
right. Well, we'll continue into the anger portion. So let me see. Okay, yeah. So she has
By
blah
the
blah
way, did
blah. I'm a pay gap. Blah blah blah. I'm a sexual harassment. Sorry, what?
I was just checking, did I say something that you disagreed with, or was it a of agreement?
No, yeah, assume of agreement.
Okay.
I think sometimes there's like this tendency where people like they feel like they have to always either restate something or like constantly add. I'm like, well, no, I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
Okay, now she's gonna go into the list of privileges that men have. The list of privileges that men get just for being male goes on and oh, that was it. Sorry. The Sorry, I'm going to reread that part. In every race and class, men will make more money than the women and are far less likely to be sexually harassed on the job or disbelieved by their physician and thus dangerously misdiagnosed when they complain of a chronic pain. The list of privileges that men get just for being male goes on and on. A man who murders his wife is more likely to be convicted of manslaughter, even when, as is most usually the case, the murder is the last act of his battery of her. A woman who kills in
Wait,
self-defense.
that's just a weird thing to say. Why most likely gonna be convicted of manslaughter?
But does she
Yeah,
mean does she mean as opposed to murder?
yeah. She's saying he's more likely to only get manslaughter instead of murder, even.
Which I'm sure isn't true. Like she's
Yeah, that can't be
usually,
true.
And she said it's usually domestic violence.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just stupid. It's
So
just
obviously, so obviously not true.
And then she goes on, a woman who kills in self-defense in the same context is more likely to spend the rest of her life in jail convicted of first-degree murder.
The reverse.
That's
It's
not true. It's completely backwards. Yeah.
yeah. It's the typical feminist thing of saying the exact opposite of the truth.
And you know what? I
I,
believe that Elizabeth Sheehy's defending battered women on trial, which of course that was in Canada, but I believe that was in the 80s or so. Like it was, I think it predates this. I could be wrong. It's either around the same time or it predates this, where she's going through these cases and explaining how she basically let a bunch of women get away with murder. Like, and
yeah, and
like
for
and
what
it was legit murder. Like there was like no ambiguity whatsoever.
I guess that's an extreme case, but even in general, I think it's been demonstrated at this point that the well, people talk about the racial differences in sentence length, but I think it's been shown in most analyses at this point that that goes away. The racial gap in sentencing goes away if you normalize for recidivism and maybe a couple of other things. Oh, yeah, recidivism and I think it's severity of the crime. Whereas females actually do get lighter sentences even after controlling for those things. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, kind of the one that people within the manosphere typically use is just that the gender gap is 6 times greater than the race gap. And then I actually haven't personally looked into like the degree to which the middle people gap would be lessened by the same factors you would control for when looking at the race gap. But it does seem that the racial disparities, those ones tend to go away once you add in factors like recidivism. Of course, since we're dealing with a gap that's like 6 times larger to begin with, I would guess that after controlling for that, you'd have something that's smaller, but I find it hard to imagine that would make it go away completely. But
Yeah.
of course, we never hear about the gender gap because that's different.
I mean, I used to be sympathetic to a kind of, I guess, utilitarian argument that, oh, if it's true that male criminals in general are more likely to reoffend, then I guess it makes sense for them to be imprisoned for longer or something approximately like that. But even when, as I said, even after you throw in those controls, women are still being unfairly privileged. So, it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, and it's and I'm not sure if just like giving women the problem is that there's not really any good way of doing it, right? Like you couldn't just like
No.
have like a mandatory multiplier on all sentences for women, right? Because the judge would know that that's in play, and then they would just like undercut what they're supposed to do like below that. So
Yeah, and
it's just a mess.
there's also uh, just as equally a utilitarian argument for being as harsh as possible, just in the interests of protecting the public, which I guess is what judicial punishment is supposed to be for. Like, yeah, why bother taking the risk? Just throw them in jail. Throw them in jail for the optimum amount of time.
Well, and I guess apparently, as unsavory as that is, it seems like it actually works, right? I think that isn't Singapore like super low crime because they're a little bit draconian.
Well, even more controversially, Saudi Arabia is. I mean, obviously, I'm not recommending chopping off people's hands for stealing or whatever, although I think in practice that's very rarely enforced. But you have those kind of volatile populations, but the crime rate is nowhere near what you would expect given the characteristics that those people have. And it's basically similar to a Western country in terms of its homicide rate and very low rate of minor crimes as well. So, um, like I said, I'm sympathetic to a kind of utilitarian approach where you just do whatever, you exact whatever punishment, whatever measure is necessary to minimize the amount of antisocial behavior and crime and so on in the society. And if that means extremely harsh punishments or punishments that feel disproportionate to people, then so be it. Yeah, we should get on with it.
I mean, it is kind of a lesser evil when you consider that the victims of crime are innocent, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. Yeah, but that was really weird. So she says, yeah, women get horrible sentences for their first degree murder, even when it's self defense. So I am angry at the tendency of this men's movement to portray men as the victims, the real victims. As versus women? I wonder. Where, I ask, are the John Stoltenbergs, the men willing to stand with women and say that the world will change for men only when men change their treatment of women and give up what he calls rapist ethics? Stoltenberg is able to describe many of the same dilemmas faced by men: alienation from self, problems of intimacy, without shirking responsibility for how men have largely created and constructed their own definitions and difficult realities, while attempting to impose those definitions on women as well. Why, I wonder, is it that Stoltenberg's book, which I believe to be one of the most accurate pieces of writing and analysis of men in the English language, is not on the top of the bestseller list? Why is he not being lionized by Bill Moyers and paid huge sums to speak to the public? Mary Daly teaches us to look at patriarchal reversals in thinking, and this is a case of such a reversal that angers me. I am angry that this men's movement identifies the problem with men as related to their attachments to women, implying that the failure of father-son relationships is women's doing and the root of all evil.
Okay, so I just want to point out that a man-hating lesbian believes that she is the authority on what is the proper analysis of men.
Yeah, well, she's deferring to John Stoltenberg, but yes, in her judgment, that is.
That's better than a popular book that people actually like.
Yeah.
And this is a nitpick, but she said alienation from self. I mean, I guess it's meant to sound kind of profound, but what does it really mean? I mean, that phrase just makes me think of, I guess, like out of body experiences or some shit.
I
What
think
does
it's
that mean?
kind of like when people say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't being myself," right? And it's
Yeah.
kind of like one of these bullshit phrases because it's like, well, no, you can't not be yourself. Whatever you do is
Is
you,
yourself.
right? But I think that it's it's using self in kind of a similar sense that like there's this truer form of you that you could be, that you could be better, but you're not doing it.
Yeah, there was a great line in the show My So-Called Life from the 90s, which was it was supposed to be like the real experience of high school students. It was kind of like a boring version of Freaks and Geeks, and but it's kind of amazing in this weird way where if you grew up with it, you can like it, you know, because it wasn't like other shows. And the main character was named no, Angela, and Angela. It was she was played by Claire Danes. That was Claire Danes' first role, and she would have these monologues, usually at the beginning and usually at the end of episodes. And at the end of one of the episodes, she was like, "Sometimes people talk about their true self, like it's something, like a toaster."
I think I've seen this. I think I remember this.
And it was a really funny show. The best character was Rayanne, her best friend that was the bad girl that had multicolored hair with crazy braids in it, who once overdosed on, or she had to go to the hospital from ecstasy and alcohol. Um, she was the best.
She's the best.
And there was a really funny gay guy named Ricky.
Yeah, I know I've seen this show. I just don't remember the plot very well. I think it's been a few years.
There wasn't
Because
really
I
a
didn't see it when I
plot.
was like young. I saw it like either like after I was in college or something. Because I had a friend who I went to college with who was like, "This is the best show ever. You have to watch it." And I was like, "Okay."
It was written by a guidance counselor, like a former high school guidance counselor who decided to make a show about what it's really like. And it wasn't wrong, it wasn't like totally unrealistic. It was fairly realistic, but it was mostly just kind of boring. Like I would say Freaks and Geeks is pretty similar to what high school is really like, except for it was, obviously comedic and over the top, but it's not like people aren't funny in real life. So
Freaks and Geeks is such a good show.
yeah.
It's like it to me. It is like the gold standard of that genre.
Yeah.
Like I
And
can't think of anything else that just does that genre so well. I
mhm.
guess like Mean Girls is like, but Mean Girls kind of has
No,
its own
no,
flavor and its own thing. You know, it's not
Mean Girls was Heather's ripoff.
okay. Sure, sure, but you know,
Have
it
you
was
have
like
you seen Heather's?
I have seen Heather's. Yes,
Heather's was way more over the top and absurd, but it was such a better movie.
I don't know.
Mean Girls was trying to be realistic. Heather's like wasn't at all.
I think I have to agree to disagree. I think that Mean Girls was cartoonish in a lot of ways. Like
Oh,
had its own.
well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Heather's was a way like when was the last time you saw Heather's?
Oh, like it's been at least a decade. So
I mean, did you only watch it once?
I think only once. Yeah.
Because that's a movie worth watching a number of
I'd
times.
probably
It's
watch it
like
again.
it's really brilliant script writing, and yeah, there's so many cool things about it if you think about like the socio-political connotations within it, like the girls running the school, and being tyrants, and yeah, it was cool.
So Terrence mentioned in the chat rapist ethics. Yeah, so that comes from John Stoltenberg's book, Refusing to Be a Man, which that the more that keeps coming up, the more I'm like, definitely there should be a stream of like reading through that. But it's very similar to this book where it just it sucks. It sucks and it's awful. Like reading it is like the worst experience because it's so stupid and so offensive. So the only way to read it is to like make fun of it as you go. Okay, so then
So I
sorry,
was
what?
just gonna, yeah, on being your true self, etc. There's a way you could link it, I guess, to just social incentives that affect people's behavior. And when it comes to men's behavior, women are certainly part of that, often unacknowledged by feminists. It's why it's so ridiculous when people say things like "men are the cause of war," um, and that's the end of the conversation, or they certainly present it that way. because a lot of wars, or probably most wars, historically, well, I'm not going to nail my colours to that mast, but certainly many wars have been about conflicts of resources,
Yep.
and the reason men have that desire to acquire resources and land and all that stuff is for women and for their families. So
Well, and
Yeah,
that's why it's so
because
funny. I
the,
was just gonna say,
because
go ahead.
because women have a tendency to just whine about their own circumstances and the circumstances of the family without giving the slightest care in the world to what the father goes through to provide for them.
yep.
Well, and it reminds me of earlier she mentioned that that book, Mother Lines, right? Or it might have been Walk to the End of the World. It's one of these two books where this writer has a post-nuclear wasteland, right, where the males are separated from their mothers and then they're raised without understanding that women even exist, and then they just exist to be these like Spartan warrior rapists who just keep women as slaves. And like that kind of a perspective could only be tenable and realistic to somebody who at no point acknowledges that they would need the women in the first place to like want to go to war, you know. And it's very fitting that these people in this like very strong social constructivist mindset would see that as something that's like possible.
I remember being in New York City for 9/11 because I was actually there, and when
Sounded the way you phrased that just sounded really like unintentionally comical. Like I was in New York for 9/11, made it sound like a festival or something. I was
oh
there.
yeah, kind of I see what you're saying, but I don't remember almost anything about the day that it actually happened. I mean, I remember like hearing it about it. I remember like kids were crying and that type of a thing. And then I remember being on the street and there was some like woman that was probably in her early 50s or so, and I was walking by her and she was on her cell phone and she was like, "This is a war, and I say we nuke them all."
Wow.
Yeah, it was funny.
I was 11 when it happened, right? And I remember on September 12th on the morning, like I saw my mom watching the news, and I was like, "Oh, they're still talking about that?" And she's like, "Yeah, they are still talking about that, you idiot." I'm like, "Oh, I guess it's a big deal, huh?" It's like whatever.
I wish I had like more crystallized memories of it, but I was only 3 when it happened, so
Are you that young?
yes,
That's
I'm 21.
that's so young. Like, what are you doing being that young?
British people are smart. What can you say?
Thanks.
Okay, so then yeah, I got so derailed by just rapist ethics. So this is the thing. Like, if it, one of the things that makes this so outrageous is like if you know that John Stoltenberg BS, she's exalting that as like what she calls the most accurate understanding of what's important about masculinity, and I'm just like cringing at the thought that this woman deals in psychotherapy. I hope that she's never had a male client. I hope she's never had a. I mean, I don't think any of her clients are better off, but particularly not men. I feel like this woman is just toxic. Like there's no way she could not be based on what she's written here.
Yeah, it's really disgusting the way that the psychological industry has that feminists have weaponized the psychological industry to try to brainwash people at the expense of people's well-being on their little crusade to um, rewrite people's perception of reality.
And she thinks she's helping. I really believe her that she thinks she's helping, but
Yeah,
man. Okay, so
everyone should learn to hate women like I do, or men. I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then so then she's criticizing the men's movement for implying that the failure of father son relationships is women's doing. Um. Yeah. I mean, is that even that far fetched of a claim? Right. Like when you have a single mother who alienates the child from the father, or who gets exclusive custody, and you have feminists who fight against shared parenting, what other conclusion could you come to? Right? Like do women not have any responsibility in attacking that relationship between the father and son?
yeah, I want to know how they would answer that question. They'd have something. I can't. I'm not able to brainstorm what it would probably be at this time.
Well, I mean, the witch who said she was going to put a curse on me and light a candle for me, to heal me, right? Because this is not dark magic. It's magic with a K, but it is not dark magic. It is a healing spell, I'm sure. She would say, "Well, these are all just generalizations. You don't know. You don't know the circumstance. You can't just generalize." And that's
Yeah.
kind of her, white woman woo to get us to stop thinking about it.
I had a male feminist tell me, like, I was listing examples of uh, bias against men and that type of a thing, and he was like, I said things that were undeniable, and then one of the things I said was like how men always lose custody in family court even if the mother is abusive. And he was like, well, I can see your point with all those except for one. A woman should never lose custody of her own children. And I was like, even if she's a crackhead. And I don't even remember what he said. I think he just kind of was like, yeah, never. A woman should always have, it's just like, Jesus. Like, I sorry that you hate your father, but no, there's plenty of exceptions to what you just said.
Another interesting point, like on this issue of custody, was I was listening to TFM stream where he had Halsey on, and one thing Halsey mentioned was that he said it was specifically in because he's a Jew. He talks about the Orthodox Jew community. He said that often a lot of women in these divorces, they actually don't want to raise kids. They don't want to have custody, but they want to fight for custody because it's a status symbol. And he said that they've found that when they instruct the men in those situations to kind of not go too hard on her and to really try to angle to make it look like it's her decision, then they're more likely to get custody that way.
Um, yeah. My mom tried to pull that crap with my father. Like he fought for custody of us when we were little. I think most likely just because my mom was insane, and I mean, honestly, my view is that he was wrong to think that he would actually provide a better life for my younger, not she's not younger, but the younger sister of in that was my sister. There's two, but one was 9 years older, one was 2 years older. He was wrong to think that he could provide a better life for us, but I think he was right that my mother was crazy, and there were some other things that were more extreme, that so extreme that I don't want to actually mention them. But uh, he, my mother has tried to say that um, he was fighting for us to spite her and then also to make a big show of it for the neighbors or something like because if he was being slandered, like there people were lying about him, and if he didn't respond then it would it would mess up with his image, and that was his whole reason supposedly. And it's like, no, I think you're actually just crazy. Like,
Yeah, it doesn't seem obvious to me that many people would be interested in kind of jumping into the aftermath of a divorce and then saying, "Oh, like this person didn't get custody, they must be a bad person," right? Like I don't think that most people are kind of that like mean spirited. Like, but I'm
Yeah,
sure that that's a in play, the expectation of it or the thought of it. This
yeah.
this next bit is very this book. I am angry that this mythopoetic movement seems to be attempting to rehabilitate patriarchy by dressing it in the garments stolen from a variety of indigenous cultures that have been destroyed or suppressed by the spiritual ancestors of the white men in this movement.
So
Just
wait, so let me guess. She's referring to people, maybe him pointing out that there were, things that feminists would call patriarchal within indigenous populations that should be viewed as innate characteristics about
no,
males,
no, no.
and
You're
then
overthinking it. You're overthinking it. So in the mythopoetic movement, like they do a lot of like drumming, and they do a lot of things where they go out into the woods and they like use
oh,
like Native
okay,
American tools and garments and things. So and it's a constant thing in this book where like these feminists hate that because it's cultural appropriation, right? So
yeah,
that's one of their constant things that they always try to loop back to. But it's always in this fashion. It's always just this throwaway theoretical thing, right? It's even if you have like Starhawk, right, who has like a native-ish kind of a name, it's never about the actual culture and how somebody from that culture actually feels hurt by it or whatever. It's always
yeah.
just kind of using them as a prop to say, "Oh, look at these white men using these drums."
I had the most insidious example of this happen, and this woman is the worst. She lives in Portland, and she has somehow very seemingly very deliberately sucked up and then fought for a position of power in all of the techno specific electronic music um, forums and with DJs and clubs that she can. And then she's just a crazy feminist liar that will say horrible things about people and lie all the time. And I think she says she's non-binary, so she can call people transphobic and just, but she's very, very femme, she's very obviously just a woman. Um, I was briefly friends with her on Facebook, and she posted the dumbest thing. It was all like, I just want to let everybody know that when white people talk about two spirits, not even two spirits, because that's kind of a weird thing for white people to say, but she said it was about spirit animal. She was like, when people talk about something being their spirit animal, that's a cultural appropriation and it's racist. So please stop or something. And all these people were like, yeah, it's so terrible. It's just like, it's so dumb, and I just wrote, I didn't even like, this is not when I even became a full blown anti SJW at that point. This was just me being like, okay, these people probably mean well, but they're acting like idiots, so I'll try to make some sense. I said, well, hey, all these people that are freaking out about, I didn't say that, all these people that are offended by this notion, do any of you actually know which tribe it came from? Because maybe I don't even, I might have just said that and somebody was like, no, and I don't care, it's icky and gross, it's blah blah blah. And I was like, well, yeah, but if you knew what tribe it came from, you could lead people in the direction of learning about it, and they'd at least be educated and see if the tribe is offended and explain to them why. I feel like it would be more productive. And some people were kind of like arguing with me, but then I think some people even agreed with me. And then she came along and she just flat out deleted my comment and all of the subthread.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, it's
That's
it's
one way
like,
to win an argument.
yeah, well, and it just showed that it wasn't she was not at all trying to help Native Americans. She was not at all trying to fight against racism. She was just trying to attack people.
And I think that that's really illuminating because it's like, what's the real cultural appropriation? Like a person who is kind of mimicking or copying a concept, or somebody who takes that as an excuse to kind of stand on a soapbox, right, and like make it this big offense. It seems
Yeah.
like, and it seems to me a very white thing too. It's very distinctly white people complaining about and tone policing others from this
Well,
weird posture
it's
of fake
mostly
sensitivity.
mostly white women. Yeah, but yeah, it is weird. Like when you're trying to speak for and be offended on the behalf of people and claiming to like know about them, and yeah, you obviously don't really care about them, and especially cuz if like they're so dead set on not mimicking or like even participating in these cultures, because that would be a cultural appropriation, that the only thing they do is speak on their behalf and get offended on their behalf as a prop, they using them as a prop. Then that is like complete and utter. It's just like they become a tool in your toolkit and nothing more, because you are actively removing yourself from their culture as much as you can.
Well, if the uh, the approval or even just the non-disapproval of, I guess, the indigenous cultures is irrelevant to whether or not a certain behavior is regarded as cultural appropriation, then I guess it's a bit galaxy-brained, but couldn't you say that feminists are always asking men to culturally appropriate female customs and behavior by asking them to be more emotionally overt and so on?
Oh yeah, the entire concept of like gender abolition
Right.
is taking sort of like gendered appropriation, right, and like making it a duty to undo it.
Yeah, but they think that you know everybody was completely equal, non-binary blank slates, and then you know um somebody bit that apple in the Garden of Eden, one of the genderless people, might have even been someone with male genitalia. That's and then all of a sudden patriarchy came into the world and split everybody up, and so we should be returning to the natural state of being by not.
Becoming asexually reproducing lizards who are all clones of each other.
That's
That's a
it.
Yeah.
thing.
And it's all because Adam bit the apple, and then he blamed it on Eve, and then he beat her up, and he killed her, and then he only got charged with manslaughter.
Yeah, it's true.
She continues, and now for criticism. So, just to be clear, everything she said up to this point, this was not the criticism. Now we're getting into the criticism. And now for criticism, which is a second order emotion mixed with intellect. There are a variety of dimensions on which I find myself critical of this men's movement, but they seem to cluster along the factor of triviality. Women and children are being beaten and raped at home by men. Air and water are growing more toxic by the moment thanks to industries owned and run by men. Funding for social programs is being cut to the bone by government dominated. By government by government dominated by men. That she means governments. Okay. And these guys are getting together to lament that they never knew their fathers? Like, I'm just bewildered.
I'm gonna be smoking again.
Like, it's so crazy to me that she just sees that as trivial. Like, yeah, them not knowing their fathers is a big deal. Like, why. What? Okay, anyway. Now, as a therapist, I know that this is a genuine source of pain for men, and part of me rejoices that some men are beginning to see how they have disowned their pain and acted it out onto the bodies and lives of women. Because they do, we can all. Because when they do, we can all get to heal. But my vision of a movement is one that calls out for political awareness and activity, that mixes consciousness raising and the speaking of bitterness with action to change the world. When the reins of change lie in the hands of men, what do I think a men's movement should be doing? Not getting together for sweat lodges and heightened sensitivity to one's own feelings, not unless the sweat lodge is accompanied by action in alliance with the indigenous people whose ritual this is, not unless the newly found ability to cry is coupled with a commitment to learn how to truly listen to the tears of others. While feminism has had many problems, one of them has not been an inattention to the need to change the world that is the source of so much of our pain. We talked about rape. Then we went out to change the laws, build rape crisis centers, teach self defense classes. When we talked about women battering, we founded shelters. Ugh. It's just like ridiculous.
Listening.
Like, this is all shit that, like, men paid for, that men built. You know, these same governments that she's shitting on and saying, oh, these governments are cutting all these programs and destroying our environment, and it's all run by men. You know, it's the same thing with the Nazis thing. She sees, like, the Nazis as this embodiment of mythopoetic maleness and essential maleness, and then just presumes that they were defeated by a bunch of black lesbians. And apparently it's just a bunch of black lesbians who built all the rape crisis centers and all the domestic violence shelters.
And sorry for, I guess, linguistic nitpicking, but she said listening to tears, which sounds like a really painful ASMR video or something.
You have to listen to the tears.
Yeah, like the eating sounds videos or something, except even more atrocious.
There's something about that too, just this idea that, like, tears speak. Like, what a bitch made way of thinking of just like, I'm crying and that's the message. Listen to my tears.
Yeah, it's like it's literally. I mean, I don't want to say she's at the mental level of an infant, but it's how infants communicate.
Well, I want to say, one of the big ironies about feminists, you know, the whole like men need to learn to show their feelings, blah, 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 blah. That was told to me my entire life. My mother was a feminist. She did all sorts of weird things. Like when we were, and it was so funny. It was always so clinical when she would decide to have quality time with us. Like she would be reading some, you know, like self-help book or like parenting book. So then she would decide to do something, or she would had a new therapist that month and they would tell her to do something. And like at one point she had these little cards that were called affirmations that had little statements like, you are very well loved. I am glad every day that you are here on this earth. And she would like sit there reading them to me, and it's like, oh, how totally authentic. Like I feel so much better, mom, you know. And so I was always getting all like the feminist crap about, but the thing is, and this is a universal thing with feminists, they want men to show their feelings, but what they only want to hear about is how men have hurt them. Like if the second you start saying that, you know, it's actually women or God forbid feminism that has dramatically been awful to you, then they will try to be like, they'll basically try to explain to you how your feelings are wrong and be like, no, 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 that's not the real problem. You just think that that's the problem. And it was only really getting in touch with or learning about the men's rights movement and then realizing that I am an MRA that I started to actually become properly in touch with all of the messed up things that did happen to me over the course of my life, and that I think happened to most males. And it's so interesting. Like if you were Echoplex, you could say that it's me playing the victim, but I know it's not just playing. I know that these really unfair things happened to me repeatedly. And the thing is that I was unwilling to acknowledge those things most of my life because I had been so raised and trained by feminism not to. So it's what they claim to want is so obviously the reverse of what ends up happening in practice.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, that they want men to read the affirmations, but they want to make sure that they're the ones that they wrote.
Yeah, something. Yeah, God forbid you try to get my mom to like actually say something authentic about her love for her children. She wouldn't know where to begin because her love for her children is basically, how will I look good to other people with my parenting? Not how do I think kids should be parented, because she's actually messed in the head.
And like I think that it's kind of a surprisingly common dynamic, and I think you see it in a lot of like online discussions between like mothers on the internet, that like it's a lot of one-upsmanship and it's a lot of sanctimonyism and stuff like that. That really seems to suggest that a really big component of it is how they're viewed by others and this sort of morality of social approval that goes on, which is sad. All right,
It's
okay, go ahead.
it's especially funny to see when somebody confronts them on the issue of circumcision, for instance.
Oh yeah, it's the excuses they give are absolutely ridiculous. Or you'll have these like kind of soft intactivist types who they'll defend. They'll say, well, you shouldn't shame mothers. We wouldn't want that.
Nah.
Like they're all for being against it. But as long as it was their choice to not do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so she continues. It is interesting that, as I write this, I think of some local groups of African American men who have come together in Seattle to serve as mentors and role models for their younger cohorts. These men are not bemoaning their fates as African American males, although well they could. They are more likely to die violently and young, to be hassled by the police just for being there, to suffer endless insults to soul and spirit than the middle class white men of the movement. But they are not mourning. They are organizing, acting to change their world, giving to African American children what is necessary to survive and thrive in racist America. Where, says my critical voice, is the spirit in the mythopoetic men's movement? I now wonder, as I approach the end of my writing, whether I am truly amused by this phenomenon, or whether my so-called amusement is simply my criticism shaded in slightly friendlier tones. Because when I read my own thoughts clearly on the blinking blue-green screen, I do not find the mythopoetic men's movement funny. As a Jew, I know that my culture has a long history of laughing in the face of the oppressor in order to reduce his power in our souls. If you can find what's funny about the Tsar, you won't be quite so devastated when he sends his troops to roust you out of house and home. I wonder if my laughter, and that of other women, is a similar whistling in the dark. Are we trying to find this men's movement funny so that we are less frightened by the sight of groups of men together, impassioned and stripping themselves of polite conventions? In another context, they look and sound too much like the gangs of boys that have intimidated and raped us all through recorded time. One emotion that I have not explored is sadness. And I am sad, a little bit, because it seems that white heterosexual men need a movement. They need groups like the National Organization for Men Against Sexism, the struggling survivor of the angst of the anti-sexist men's movement of the 1970s, home of Stoltenberg and others like him. They are destroying themselves and the things that they profess to love through their continued participation in patriarchy. Men need to think together, powerfully and out loud, about how this thing called masculinity is highly socially constructed, and therefore can be dethroned at any time in favor of definitions that do not rely upon hierarchies of power and dominance. Do not, as Phyllis Chester pointed out in About Men, define war and the destruction of life as the epitome of maleness. For if women are essentially defined as birth and life givers, then men, in Western culture's dichotomous mode, must define themselves as the opposite, as death dealers. Men need a movement in which they will criticize these tendencies in one another, in which they become the allies of women, rather than competing with us over who is more truly the victim of patriarchy.
Oh my god. Okay, first of all, they don't say patriarchy. Second of all, the irony of a feminist trying to talk about men and women becoming allies. Like, it's like you become allies and share our worldview and fight against yourselves. Duh. That's how we will live harmoniously. Like, how dare you? How absolutely dare you? How dare you, ma'am?
No, I completely agree. It actually ties back to the what we were talking about at the very beginning of the stream too, which is we've come full circle. I was just a bit distracted. Terrence had mentioned in the chat Russian Deadpool had no mas. and he shot his girlfriend in the neck. I wonder if was he really looking into Nomas? That's an interesting link there. It seems that every single time you have anybody who is like an online person who talks about anything related to gender, it seems like all the ones who go crazy are the ones who had very blue pilled influences. Like the incels, and they may have some red pill knowledge, but their response and way about the world is very much gynocentric. It's very much seeking female approval and validation. Then you have Russian Deadpool. Yeah, if that's true that he was pro Nomos, National Organization of Men Against Sexism. I think I do remember that he would point to this as like an example of the good MRAs. Well, I guess the results speak for themselves, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's also weird too, right? So she has this whole issue against essentialism and dualism, and in her view, men are viewed as like the death dealers, opposite to women being like life affirming and life giving. But is she really doing anything to counter this narrative? Is she? It seems like this approach and this view isn't something that she's reacting to or trying to shut down or stop. It seems like she's actually affirming it, that she needs that to be firmly in place for anything that she says to make any sense.
Yeah, well, feminism, they need gender stereotypes to make any sense. That's the big irony. Like they claim to want to undo them and then fall back on them in literally every argument, essentially.
Essentially. All right, we're in the last paragraph here. Her conclusion on her reaction to feeling sad. I'm sad because I doubt that this will happen. The mythopoetic men's movement is likely to go the way of other passions that have swept white middle class men at times of economic crisis and social and cultural transition. Some parts of it will integrate into the general culture. Some will disappear. Some re-emerge in 20 years' time, as if they were born anew. Remember Charles Reich and The Greening of America? Same tune, only slightly different words. Some mostly heterosexual women will have their hopes for men raised and dashed again. Some women, like myself, will return to our tasks of trying to make the feminist revolution happen one life at a time. A few group leaders and workshop promoters will have made a good living. But, saddest of all, this movement will not move us as a culture. It will leave patriarchy unchallenged and intact. When I come to the end of my analysis, sadness predominates. Sadness that all of this energy will go for naught toward genuine change in this wounded world.
So basically, they're not feminists yet. They're not. When are they going to become feminists? They're men, and they're not feminists.
Yep, she's got all the answers. If only everybody would just become feminists. And she's gonna heal the world one person at a time, doing her bit. So she can dust off her hands. She's not responsible.
By telling them they're not allowed to be upset that they don't have a relationship with their fathers, with all of the environmental things going on, and the fact that social programs are being cut.
Yeah, which isn't even true, but and that's the thing too, is that I think that's like the biggest takeaway, the biggest like revelation here is you have this psychotherapist who has absolutely no interest in reflecting on what an individual person's reason for seeking out that movement may be, and she scoffs at the idea, that they, are sad that they never knew their fathers. She ends that part with an exclamation point and a question mark, right? It's like, to her, it's like completely ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, like what does she tell her clients when they come in and, talk about things like that and be like, "Oh, I have never seen such a snowflake. I mean, there's so much wine in this room. Do you want me to pass you the Chardonnay,
Yeah, I'll bet she rolls her
Broflake?
fucking eyes. I bet she rolls her eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, men like you have raped women, every one of us throughout history.
We've all been raped
Yeah,
again and again and again.
the preferred, I guess, drug of choice is Chardonnay for people of her social environment, and the people who know genuine sadness, like I guess white middle America, especially the males, for them it's opioids. They become addicted to opioids, but I would guess she doesn't care about that.
Yeah, I wonder if she gets like anybody who has like a drug addiction, and she's like, why don't you just have a glass of Chardonnay? Just have a glass of Chardonnay in a nice hot bath, and read Handmaid's Tale. I don't like. Why do you got to do real drugs to unwind?
No,
And
what she would really say was, well, I think that maybe you're trying to bury your emotions. Why don't you share your emotions? Why don't you share how men have hurt you? No, no, no. It's not the fact that you weren't allowed to even get to know your father. It's that he would have hurt you if you did. Share about that.
Yeah, maybe that's a blessing. A lot of men are hurt by their fathers, and by not having him in your life, that's just neutral. That's just neutral.
No, I think it would be more like, well, clearly he did something to hurt you and your mother. And so that's why you didn't get to see him. So let's talk about the pain he inflicted upon your mother. Oh, you don't know about it? Well, I'll explain it to you.
Yeah, right. Or why don't you know? Why wasn't that interesting to you? Hmm. Uh, well, we're 2 hours in, and I don't know. I think I don't feel like doing this next one right now because it's just gonna be draining.
Okay.
But I think that maybe I'll have another one of these streams before next week, so that next week we can do the bell hooks one.
Okay.
So I have this one ready for next week, which is Vicky Noble's A Helping Hand from the Guys, and this is the tarot reader woman.
Okay.
So this one might be a little bit more, I guess, funny. Like all the crazy spiritual healer style feminists are always like the funniest streams. But then, yeah, that just the fact that that woman is like a practicing psychologist, like we all know about that, in the theoretical, but to really go through an essay like that and to realize that that's her response to men having a movement and men having issues. There's absolutely no discussion of issues that disproportionately affect men. She just lists issues that affect women and then says these are all privileges, and then yeah, it's completely unreflective and just stupid. And I
Yeah.
don't know what her excuse is. She's a
What,
doctor, There's no
no,
excuse.
it's like how you can hear that there has to be, weird, crazy feminist psychologists, and it's not very real to you until you really read it in the same kind of type of way when, I had been told for years that Bell Hooks was the matron saint of feminism, that if I finally just read Bell Hooks would explain it to me better than anyone, and I would get why it's a good movement. And then I did. And she was even worse. Like she was like
Yeah.
the worst that I had read, and it's just like how these people can just be so removed from like reality, from logic, from everything. Um, so yeah. By the way, I just want to say while unless I forget, I just found out while we were on the stream that our guest for Gaytriarchy will on Saturday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, is going to be a gay guy who is black, who lives in Chicago, who used to be, he's very young. He's only like 21 probably. And he used to be a conservative, I guess. Like his parents were like, Democrats. And then he decided to be some sort of conservative to rebel. And then he ended up not liking a lot of the people like kind of associated with the anti-SJW movement, like the Andy Worski types. And so then he just like went the full blown ContraPoints route for a while, but I had a conversation with him before. Like I talked to him on the stream for a while, and he was easy to talk to. Like he's rational. Like he listens to things. He's not like he just came to this. I would say that his biggest downfall is that he's overwhelmingly tainted by his personal experiences with people, which are, obviously very limited when it comes to um, being just a university student. And so then he went to the anarcho-communist thing for a while, but then now has become a Marxist-Leninist, so he's more of an authoritarian. But he also hates SJWs again, and also has become very critical of feminism. Um, More so, like I think he actually spent time around these people, and then also he's more critical of ContraPoints, he used to call the Queen. um, and so it'll be weird. He's not going to be entirely what's the word, like easily compatible guest, but he is worth talking to. He's because you can make progress with him. He listens.
No, that should be
So
interesting because it kind of because he'll have some knowledge and command, I think, of different areas of thought that maybe we don't always like look at. And I don't know, like because I'm not as tapped into all of the communist speakers and everything as somebody who's actually like really really gone and dived into it. So that could be interesting.
yeah, he's interesting, and it's interesting how I actually talked with him. I made some video and some feminist SJW type, screenshot it, and then misrepresented the video on Twitter. Like said that I was saying something that I wasn't saying, and then that guy, I think, tagged me, and he was like, "Prince of Queens, isn't this the guy that was trying to tell black men to be wary of feminism, or to disown feminism, or to turn on feminism, or whatever?" And I was like, "Yep, I absolutely am. Here's the video in which I said that mainly." And um, uh, then the other woman started talking, and I don't know, she was talking about intersectionality or something, and I was like, "Okay." So, and he said, somehow mentioned that he was gay, and he's black and gay, and I was like, so curious, as a black gay man, do you feel as if you have male privilege? Because I assure you, she thinks that you do. And he was like, "No, I wouldn't really say that. No." And then she just stopped saying anything about that. And I think if she said anything, she was trying to change the subject away from the fact that it's like, yes, no, one of the intrinsic parts of her belief is beliefs, and in her entire worldview is based around something that objectively through your individual experiences are absolutely not true. you know and so then he did a stream with me after that, and we talked about stuff like, you can look at the stream. There's an old stream on my Prince of Queens live streams channel,
What? How long ago was that one?
like over a year ago.
Oh, okay. And what's his name? What does he go by?
His name's Taylor, but I mean, you could go look at the stream. It's not I think it's like streaming with a young black gay Antifa.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that he doesn't consider himself an Antifa anymore because they're all anarcho-communists. He considers himself more of a Marxist purist now. But it's cool that he learned past that. Maybe we could just help him along a little bit further. But be easy on him because he is open to learning. He just has a lot to learn.
Yeah. No, and I can be nice. I can go into the bread box without, I don't know, without growling or eating all the bread or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if we got a bingo on this one. This is the sheet that I grabbed that was randomly generated. I don't know if you're looking at the stream, you can see it, but so I have toxic masculinity up in the corner. This one, I'm not sure if we had on this one. I'm not sure if she implied that, she certainly didn't use the phrase. This phrase wasn't really popular around the time, so that's kind of a debatable one. Emotional labor, that didn't really come up here. She didn't really mention any of the archetypes of king,
Oh no,
warrior,
wait, I
magician,
think that
lover.
she did. I think that she did say something along the lines of emotional labor. Like she didn't say the words, but I feel like she kind of. No, I don't remember it though, so I can't say.
Well, the entire thing was kind of an emotional labor, right? Like she structured the entire thing around her emotional responses to things.
No, but
It
that's
very much
that's
had the
not.
flavor.
No, emotional labor is usually just like what is used by feminists to discount male contributions by saying, well, women actually, were the wind beneath their wings.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it had to do with the misdiagnosis of women not being taken seriously when they go to get diagnosis, go to get treatment. But I guess that's kind of a stretch too. We have hierarchy bad. That was in there. She did shit on hierarchies. We did have rape. Man up. I think man up. I would say this one was a yes. She's saying stop crying about your fathers and start helping women more. Women have it worse. So we did get a bingo, I think, on this line here. I would say that was definitely there. Dualism bad was definitely there. War as a male phenomenon, that was definitely there. Deconstructing masculinity, I think, was also a pretty core theme. So yes, I'd say we have this one as well. We did not have the divine feminine. I don't think we necessarily had just express yourself, just express your emotions. That one's also kind of a debatable one. Deconstructing masculinity, definitely. All of the shilling for Stoltenberg is very much in that camp. Gender pay gap, yes, definitely. Violence against women, also definitely a yes. Homophobia, ironically, not so much. We're kind of on the edge of it, but I don't think we really had that. But definitely a bingo this way and that way. So if you were playing at home, I don't know if you had more than two bingos, but it looks like maybe like half of these you can make a really strong argument for.
Huh. Okay.
All right, any closing thoughts?
No, not really.
Yeah, I think we've commented just
It
about
was
everything.
it was fun, I guess.
This was a fun one. Yeah, this one I think was very squarely flavored like this book.
Yeah.
But
Okay, I'm
it's
gonna
another
go.
reminder that John Stoltenberg on refusing to be a man. That's one that definitely, probably after sometime later this year after the ICMI, that'll definitely have to be a stream or two or several.
Uh-huh. Okay, I'm gonna go lie down, guys. Good streaming with you.
All right, yep, good. Thanks for coming by, and yeah, I'll see you on Gatriarchy later this
Yeah.
week.
See you.
See ya.
Bye. And goodbye to the chat also. You guys keep on keeping on and have a nice day.